The phone was not supposed to work. That was the first thing Dorothy Mills noticed when it rang. Not who was calling, not what the call might mean, but the simple fact that the phone was ringing at all. She had found it 3 days ago in the Lost and Found box at the Salvation Army on Vine Street, a crack-screen smartphone in a Ziploc bag with a charger that had been donated along with it. And she had asked if she could have it, and the volunteer had said yes, and she had charged it in the bathroom of the gas station where she had been sleeping for 11 days, and it had turned on, which had already exceeded her expectations. She had not expected it to receive calls. She had used it for 2 things in 3 days: checking the time, which it did reliably, and attempting to access the email account she had created before her arrest, and to which she had lost the password, which it did not do reliably. She had not called anyone because she had not wanted to receive the specific variety of silence that came when a person she used to know picked up the phone and found out it was her. She looked at the screen. The number was not in her contacts because she had no contacts. The phone had been wiped before it was donated, which meant it was essentially new in the form that a phone can be new when it is cracked and someone else's. The number was unfamiliar. She almost did not answer. She answered. "Is this Dorothy Mills?" the voice said. "Who's asking?" she said, which was what you said when you had been out for 3 years and had learned to treat unexpected contact with the appropriate caution. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Then, "This is Steve Harvey." Dorothy Mills was 61 years old, and she had been released from the Tennessee State Correctional Facility for Women 14 months ago after serving 3 years of a 5-year sentence for a financial crime that she had committed in the specific circumstances of a person who had made a very bad decision at the worst possible time for the wrong reasons, which did not make it not a crime, but which made it the kind of crime that a person could spend 3 years understanding with great thoroughness. She understood it with great thoroughness. She had come out with almost nothing: a release stipend that lasted 6 weeks, a parole condition that restricted where she could live, a name that had been in the local news in a way that followed her to job interviews and housing applications, and had constituted the visible edge of a wall she had been hitting consistently for 14 months. She had applied for 11 jobs. 2 had called her back for interviews. Neither had extended an offer after the background check. She had tried to rent a room in 4 different places. The parole conditions had made 2 of them ineligible, and the landlords of the other 2 had declined after the background check. She had stayed with her sister for 6 weeks until the arrangement became something other than sustainable. She had been at the Citgo station for 11 days. She had a daughter in Memphis who had been 11 years old when Dorothy went in, and who was now 14 and who had been living with Dorothy's sister and who had not come to the phone the last 4 times Dorothy had called. She had been sleeping in the storage room of an abandoned Citgo station on Route 9 for 11 days. The owner, a man named Walter Song, who was 64 years old and who had inherited the station from his father, and who had been trying to sell it for 2 years without finding a buyer at a price that made the selling worth the paperwork, had given her a key. Dorothy had not asked him as a supplicant. She had asked him the way she did everything in the 14 months since her release, directly, without apology for her circumstances, with the specific dignity of a woman who had decided that dignity was the one thing she was not going to surrender to the circumstances, because if you surrendered that, there was nothing left to rebuild from. Walter Song had listened to her for 3 minutes and had looked at her for a long moment and had gone to the register and gotten the key to the storage room and handed it to her. He said, "The heat is off, but there's running water." She said, "That's enough." He said, "I know." She had a sleeping bag that had been donated. She had 3 changes of clothes. She had the phone. "Steve Harvey," she said, not as a greeting, not as a confirmation, as a test of the words against the air in the room, to see if they held up. She had been in the storage room long enough to have established, with some confidence, the rules of the space. What sounds came in from Route 9, what the water stain on the ceiling looked like at different times of day, what the specific quality of the silence was at various hours. The name did not fit the rules of the space. The name was from a different category entirely. She let it sit in the air for a second. "Steve Harvey," she said again. "Yes, ma'am," the voice said. She sat down on the sleeping bag. "How did you get this number?" What followed was an explanation that required patience to receive. And Dorothy Mills was a patient woman. Not because patience was her natural disposition, which it was not, but because 3 years of incarceration had taught her the specific value of waiting for information to become complete before responding to it. Since responding before information was complete had been responsible for several of the larger difficulties of her adult life. She waited, she listened, she asked 3 questions. She received the answers. Steve Harvey's production team had been contacted by a woman named Sister Agnes Porter, who had been Dorothy's cellmate for 8 months of the 3 years, and who had been released 4 months before Dorothy, and who had since gotten herself a part-time job and a room in a supervised residence, and who had been trying to find Dorothy since Dorothy's release without success, until 2 weeks ago when she had run into Walter Song at a hardware store. And Walter had mentioned that a woman named Dorothy was staying in his old Citgo station. And Sister Agnes had known immediately who that was. Sister Agnes had then done something that required a level of initiative that Dorothy, sitting on her sleeping bag in an abandoned gas station, found difficult to hold in her mind all at once. Sister Agnes had called the production office of Steve Harvey's show, which she had watched every day in the common room for 3 years, and which she had decided, on some basis that she had not fully explained to the production assistant who answered the phone, was the correct place to direct this particular situation. The production assistant had taken the information. Someone had found Walter Song's number. Walter had provided the number of the donated phone. "I've been looking for you," Steve Harvey said. Dorothy Mills sat in an abandoned gas station on a sleeping bag with a cracked phone and looked at the water stain on the ceiling that had become familiar to her in 11 days, and said, "Why?" The answer to that question took 11 minutes and required on Dorothy's part the specific skill of receiving something difficult. Not difficult in the way that bad news was difficult, but difficult in the way that unexpected kindness was difficult for a person who had been managing on the assumption that unexpected kindness was not something that was going to happen to them. Steve Harvey told her about Sister Agnes first, because that was the right order. Dorothy needed to know that the chain of events had begun with someone who loved her. He told her that Sister Agnes had been asking about her for 4 months and had found her through Walter Song, and had made the call because she believed that Dorothy needed more help than she could provide, and she had directed that belief toward the one resource she was certain of, which was a television show she had watched every day for 3 years. Then he told Dorothy what he wanted to do. He said it plainly, because he had learned that the people who most needed help were also the people who were most skilled at detecting the approach of anything that felt like performance or pity, and that the only way to approach such people was with complete directness. He wanted to help her find stable housing. He said this without the qualifying language that such offers often carried. Without, "if you're interested," or "something we could explore," or the other verbal distancing that signaled that the offer had an exit built into it. He had already been in contact with a transitional housing organization in Memphis that worked specifically with formerly incarcerated women who had children, that had staff who understood the specific texture of reentry, and that had a room with availability. He had verified the availability before he called, which meant he had done the work before the conversation, which meant that what he was offering was not a possibility, but a plan. He wanted to know if Dorothy had considered contacting her daughter, and whether there was anything in the way of that, and whether that was something she wanted to think about. He asked about her daughter, the way that people ask about things when they understand that they are asking about something important and do not want to handle it carelessly. He did not preface the question with, "If you don't mind the asking," or "I hope this isn't too personal," which were the phrases people used when they were more concerned with their own comfort than with the question. He asked directly, which was a form of respect, and he waited for the answer, which was a different form of the same thing. He did not ask, "Why hasn't she called back?" which was the question that had the answer Dorothy did not want to say out loud. He asked, "What do you want for her?" Dorothy Mills had been asked many questions in the last 14 months by parole officers and caseworkers and the interviewers who had not called back, and the landlords who had found her name in the local news. Most of the questions were about what she had done and what she was doing and what she was going to do. Nobody had asked her what she wanted for her daughter. She told him. She talked for 6 minutes, which was longer than she had talked about her daughter to anyone since her release. Longer than she had let herself think about it continuously without putting it down, because thinking about it continuously was the thing that had the most potential to produce in her the specific kind of despair that was not useful, and that she had been managing carefully. She talked about Keisha, who was 14 and who had her father's eyes, and who had been first in her class in 6th grade before Dorothy went in, and who Dorothy did not know was first in her class now, or not, but who she believed was, because Keisha had always been that kind of person. She talked about what she wanted for Keisha, which was the ordinary things, stated with the specific weight that ordinary things carry when they have been at risk. Steve Harvey listened. He did not speak while she was speaking, except to make the small sounds that indicate to the person speaking that the person listening is still present. He had learned, through years of rooms and years of conversation, that the most important skill was not what you said, but the quality of your silence, and that the quality that was needed was not the silence of someone waiting for their turn, but the silence of someone who understands that the speaking itself is the point, and that the point is currently being achieved, and that nothing should interrupt it. When she was done, he said, "I hear you." He said it without additional architecture. He did not say, "I hear you and here's what I think," or "I hear you and here's what we're going to do." He said it and let it be what it was. She did not tell him what the Keisha conversations had been like, the ones that had gone to voicemail, the one where Keisha had answered and then said she needed to go before Dorothy had finished the first sentence. The specific quality of a child who had been old enough to understand what was happening and young enough to have no tools for it. She did not tell him this because it was not his to carry. But she told him enough. She told him what she wanted for Keisha, which was the ordinary things said with the specific weight that ordinary things carry when they have been at risk. She told him about the first grade teacher who had called Dorothy when Keisha was 7 and said, "Your daughter reads like she knows what words are for," which was the specific sentence Dorothy had been carrying for 7 years, and which she had not told anyone in the 14 months since her release, because there had been no one to tell it to. Then he told her that someone would call her the next morning from the housing organization and that they would work out the practical steps, and that Sister Agnes had asked him to tell Dorothy something specifically, which was, "I found you. Now let yourself be found." Dorothy Mills sat in the storage room of an abandoned Citgo station on Route 9 and did not say anything for a moment. "Tell her I heard her," Dorothy said. She called her daughter that evening from the storage room of the Citgo station, sitting on the sleeping bag with the cracked phone in her hand. She had been thinking about what Steve Harvey had asked, "What do you want for her?" And she had been turning the answer over since the call ended, and had arrived at the same place she always arrived when she thought about Keisha with full honesty, which was the place of someone who understood that wanting was not the issue, and had never been the issue, and was not going to be enough on its own, but was where you had to start. She called. Keisha answered on the 3rd ring. She did not hang up. They talked for 22 minutes, which was the longest they had spoken since before the sentencing hearing. Dorothy did not explain everything. She did not try to explain everything. She said she had found a place to stay, and that things were going to be different, and that she wanted to hear about school. Keisha told her about school for 11 minutes. which was information Dorothy had not had access to, and which she received with the full quality of her attention. Every word. The housing organization called the next morning. Dorothy moved in on a Thursday. Sister Agnes came to help her move on the Thursday, which took 45 minutes because Dorothy had almost nothing. The sleeping bag, the 3 changes of clothes, a few books she had acquired in the 14 months, the phone. Sister Agnes had also brought a bag, which contained a set of towels she had bought at the dollar store, a bag of coffee, a small clock that she said kept good time, and a plant in a pot that she said was very difficult to kill, which she had verified through personal experience over 2 years of neglect. Dorothy had looked at the plant and then at Sister Agnes and had said, "You brought a plant." Sister Agnes had said, "Every room needs one thing in it that's alive." Dorothy had not argued with this, and they sat together in the room afterward with 2 cups of tea from the organization's kitchen and did not talk much, because some things do not require talking, and this was one of them. Steve Harvey does not talk about Dorothy Mills publicly because the story belongs to Dorothy and she has not chosen to make it public, and that is entirely correct. What he has said in the context of other conversations about other things is that some phone calls you make because you were supposed to make them and only find out afterward that you were supposed to. He has said that Sister Agnes Porter is one of the most extraordinary people he has encountered in his life. And he has said this in a way that makes clear he is not being hyperbolic. Sister Agnes still watches the show. She watches it in her room now, not in a common room. Dorothy Mills has been in transitional housing for 8 months. She has a room and a part-time job at a nonprofit serving families in the child welfare system. She got it by telling the truth about her background. The director said it made her qualified rather than excluded. Keisha has visited 3 times. The 3rd lasted a weekend. Walter Song sold the station. Dorothy drove past it once and did not stop. If this story found you today, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear that being found is possible, even when you've stopped expecting it. Tell us in the comments about the Sister Agnes in your life, the person who found someone when everyone else had stopped looking. Ring that notification bell, because the next story might be for someone who hasn't been found yet.